My 9-year-old stepdaughter falsely accused me of abuse to get $7,000, but I had a secret recording where she admitted it was all a lie, and my wife never saw coming what I did next. I'm 46 years old. I work as a construction project manager, and I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago almost completely destroyed my life. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Allison about 3 years ago at a local art gallery, one of those boring openings where they serve cheap wine and everyone pretends to understand contemporary art. She was an art teacher. She was 43, divorced with a teenage daughter, and I was also coming from a divorce, though mine had been like 7 years ago already. My ex-wife Laura and I got along well. Honestly, there wasn't any drama or anything like that. We just realized we wanted different things, and that was it. We separated like civilized adults. Allison was different from the women I'd met after the divorce, or so I thought at the time. She had this creative and positive energy that attracted me. And also, she seemed to have her feet on the ground despite being an artist. You know, she wasn't one of those people who lives in the clouds all the time. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and during that time I met her daughter Jessica, who was like 16 when I met her. Jessica's biological father, Daniel, had abandoned the family when the girl was barely 2 years old and had taken off to Texas. Basically was never present except to send an occasional check that didn't even cover full child support. Jessica seemed like a normal girl at first, a little spoiled maybe, but nothing out of the ordinary for a teenager her age. I married Allison 2 years ago. It was a small and nice wedding in my backyard, nothing fancy because we'd both been through this before and didn't want all the traditional circus. I had a 3-bedroom house in a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. I'd bought it after the divorce and had completely fixed it up, like it was my personal project and my refuge. When we got married, Allison and Jessica moved in with me, which made sense because my house was bigger and in a better area than the apartment where they lived. Jessica was 18 by then and was in her last year of high school. At first, everything seemed to be going well. I mean, there were the typical adjustments of a blended family, but nothing that seriously worried me. Jessica got the guest room, which was the biggest one after the master, and I thought, well, she's a teenager, she needs her space, all good. What I didn't expect was that literally 2 weeks after moving in, Jessica announced that she needed to completely redecorate her room because the style was too adult and boring for her. Allison looked at me with those "please do it for me" eyes, and I, like an idiot trying to be the understanding stepfather, said yes. I ended up spending like $2,000 on paint, new IKEA furniture, decoration, and all that shit Jessica wanted. I thought, okay, it's a one-time expense. The girl is adjusting to a new house, it's reasonable. But then the other requests started. 3 months after moving in, Jessica announced during dinner that several of her friends were going on a trip to Paris during summer vacation, and that she obviously had to go because otherwise she'd be the only one excluded from the group. The trip cost $4,500, not counting spending money there. I told her no, that it was too much money for an 8-year-old girl who didn't even have a job, and that if she wanted to go, she'd have to get a part-time job and save up. Jessica went hysterical, literally started screaming that I wasn't her father and couldn't tell her what to do, and that her mom would have let her go. Allison just sat there saying nothing, and later when we were alone, she told me maybe we could consider it because Jessica had been through a lot with her father's abandonment and deserved nice experiences. I held my ground. We didn't go to Paris, and Jessica didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. I thought eventually she'd get over it, that it was just teenage drama, but looking back, that was the moment when things really started to go sideways. 6 months after the Paris incident, Jessica crashed her mom's car, a 2015 Honda Civic that wasn't anything special but worked perfectly. Apparently she was texting while driving and ran a stop sign, crashed into another car and completely destroyed the front of the Honda. Luckily, nobody got hurt, but the insurance skyrocketed and Allison was left without a car for 2 months while we dealt with the claim. Jessica never really apologized, like she said, sorry, but in that way where you can tell she doesn't mean it at all. And then, like a month later, Jessica announced that she'd adopted a dog from a shelter without consulting us. She came home one Saturday afternoon with a 1-year-old golden retriever named Max. Super excited. And when I asked her what the hell she was thinking, bringing a dog without permission, she told me the dog was about to be euthanized and she'd saved him. Allison immediately sided with Jessica, saying we couldn't return the dog now that he was already here, and I ended up being the villain for even suggesting that maybe adopting a dog was a decision the whole family should make together. Max was a good dog, don't get me wrong, but the point was the principle of the thing. You know, the fact that Jessica did whatever she wanted without considering anyone else. Then came the modeling portfolio thing. Jessica had decided she wanted to be a model or influencer or something like that and needed professional photos for her portfolio. She asked me for $1,500 for a session with a photographer who supposedly was very well known on Instagram. I told her it seemed like a waste of money because she had no experience or representation from any agency. But Allison stepped in, saying we shouldn't crush Jessica's dreams. I ended up paying $800 for a cheaper session with a decent photographer, and Jessica got her photos, which, by the way, never served any purpose, because it turned out she didn't like waking up early for castings or doing strict diets or anything that actually modeling involves. By that point, Jessica was already 19, had started classes at community college but dropped them after the first semester, saying college wasn't for her. Didn't have a job despite my constant suggestions that she get one, and basically spent her days on social media or with her friends spending money that Allison gave her from her own teacher's salary. The thing that really changed everything happened like 8 months ago. Jessica came into the kitchen one Sunday morning while I was having coffee and reading the newspaper and told me she needed to talk to me about something important. She sat down with her laptop and showed me this business plan she'd made in PowerPoint, like 10 slides with Instagram photos and Comic Sans fonts, and explained to me that she wanted to start her own skincare business. According to her, she was going to create her own line of natural skincare products and sell them online, and she only needed $7,000 to start. $7,000, just like that, for a business that basically consisted of buying products wholesale, putting her label on them, and reselling them with markup. I asked her basic questions, like, have you researched suppliers? Do you have any sales experience? Have you run numbers on costs and profit margins? Do you have a marketing plan beyond posting on Instagram? How long do you estimate before seeing return on investment? Jessica didn't have real answers for any of these questions. She just kept saying her friends had told her it was a great idea and that this type of business was super easy to start if you had the initial capital. I told her no. That $7,000 was a lot of money to invest in something without any kind of research or serious planning, and that if she really wanted to start a business, she should start small. With her own money, test the market first, do things in a smart and responsible way. Jessica got upset, but she didn't explode like other times. She just said, "Okay, I understand," and went to her room. I thought I'd handled the situation well. I was firm but reasonable. I explained my point of view like any responsible adult would. What I didn't know was that Jessica had decided that if she couldn't get the money the easy way, she was going to get it another way. 3 days later, Allison came home from work and had this weird expression on her face, like a mixture of pain and confusion I'd never seen on her before. She asked me to sit down in the living room because she needed to talk to me about something very serious. My first thought was that maybe she had some health problem or something with her work. I don't know, but I didn't expect what came next. Allison started crying and told me that Jessica had confessed to her that I'd been making inappropriate comments about her appearance and that she'd caught me looking at her uncomfortably when she was walking around the house in pajamas. I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach with a baseball bat. I literally couldn't process what I was hearing. I told her that was absolutely false, that I had never ever done anything remotely inappropriate with Jessica or with any woman, and that I couldn't believe she was even considering those accusations might be true. Allison said she didn't know what to think, that Jessica was very upset and had been crying all afternoon, and that she needed time to process all this. The next 2 weeks were absolute hell. Allison treated me with this cold and suspicious distance. Jessica wouldn't even look at me and spent all her time locked in her room or out of the house. And I was walking on eggshells in my own damn house, trying to understand what the hell had happened. I tried to talk to Jessica directly, but she refused to be alone with me. And when I tried to have a serious conversation with Allison, she just said she needed time and space to think. I knew I was innocent. I knew Jessica was lying. But the problem with these types of accusations is there's no way to prove a negative. You can't demonstrate that something didn't happen, and the accusation by itself is enough to destroy your reputation and your life. I called Laura, my ex-wife, because I needed to talk to someone who knew me well enough to know I was incapable of doing something like that. Laura listened to me, believed me immediately, and told me something that turned out to be the best advice I could have received. She told me to hire a lawyer immediately, because these accusations weren't going to disappear on their own, and I needed to protect myself legally. I hired a lawyer the next day, a guy specialized in family cases and false accusations who cost me $350 an hour but was worth every penny. He explained that in cases like this, where it's basically my word against hers, the best defense was documentation and evidence. He told me I needed to start recording everything, save all text messages, emails, any communication, and if it was legal in my state, to look into recording conversations. It turned out that in my state, it's legal to record conversations if at least one party consents, meaning me. So, I bought several small voice-activated recorders and placed them strategically in the common areas of the house, the living room, the kitchen, never in bathrooms or bedrooms, because that would be illegal and super invasive. I also checked the security cameras I had on the exterior of the house and made sure they were working and saving all the footage. My lawyer told me to document everything, every interaction, every weird thing I noticed, to take notes with dates and times of everything. I felt like a detective in my own house, which was ridiculous and depressing, but I knew I had to do something to prove my innocence. During the next 2 weeks after installing the recorders, not much happened. Jessica kept avoiding me. Allison was cold to me. The situation was uncomfortable as hell, but there were no new accusations or confrontations. And then, on a Thursday night, when I was working late at the office, the recorders captured something. Jessica had invited 2 of her friends to the house, and while they were in the kitchen eating pizza and drinking wine, which by the way Jessica shouldn't be drinking because she was barely 19, they started talking about me. One of the friends asked her how things were going with the creepy stepdad, and Jessica laughed and said, she literally laughed, and said that I wasn't creepy at all, but that her mom had swallowed the whole story. She said she'd made everything up because I'd refused to give her money for her business, and that it was super easy to manipulate her mom because Allison felt guilty about her father's divorce and was always trying to compensate her. The friend asked if she didn't feel guilty about ruining my reputation like that, and Jessica said, not really, that I'd been a jerk to her since she moved in, always trying to set rules and boundaries like I was her real father, and that this would teach me not to meddle in her business. When I heard that recording, I felt a mixture of relief and fury that almost made me vomit. On one hand, I had the proof I needed that Jessica had deliberately lied, but on the other hand, the confirmation that this person had been willing to destroy my life for money and spite was devastating. She didn't even care about the damage she could cause. She only cared about getting her way. I sent the recording to my lawyer immediately, and he told me this was gold, to keep collecting evidence because the more we had, the better. He also suggested I get testimonies from other people about Jessica's character, to talk to her teachers from community college, with neighbors, with anyone who'd had interactions with her that could establish a pattern of manipulative behavior. I talked to my neighbor Jim, a retired guy about 65, who lived next door and who'd had several run-ins with Jessica. Jim told me that Jessica had used his Wi-Fi without permission for months until he changed the password, that she'd left trash in his yard several times after parties, and that on one occasion she'd hit his mailbox with her car backing up and never apologized or offered to pay for the damage. Jim was more than willing to give written testimony about all this. I also contacted the photographer who had done Jessica's portfolio photos, and he told me that Jessica had tried to negotiate not paying for the full session after the fact, saying the photos weren't what she expected, despite the fact that they'd agreed on everything beforehand and the photos were exactly what she'd asked for. The photographer had all the messages from that conversation saved. I checked Jessica's Instagram, which was public because obviously she wanted to be an influencer, and found posts where she complained about having to live under her controlling stepfather's rules, posts where she talked about deserving better things, posts where she literally asked for donations for her skincare business that never took off. I documented all of this, took screenshots with dates, and sent it to my lawyer. About 3 weeks passed after the first recording, and honestly, I was already considering getting divorced and just getting out of this situation completely. But then, Jessica made the biggest mistake of her life. One afternoon, I came home early from work, like 4 p.m., instead of my usual 6 p.m., and Jessica was in the kitchen with Allison. They didn't see me arrive because I came in through the back door from the garage, and the recorders captured the entire conversation. Jessica was telling Allison that things had gotten worse, that I'd supposedly tried to enter her room one night when she was sleeping, that I'd touched her inappropriately when I passed by her in the hallway, that she was afraid to be alone in the house with me. Allison was sobbing, saying she didn't know what to do, that she loved me, but had to protect her daughter. And then Jessica said something that changed everything. She said, "Listen, Mom, there's a way to resolve this without drama. If Vincent gives me $50,000, I'll be able to go live on my own, start my life somewhere else, and I can forget all this. We can say I went to therapy and resolved my traumas, and Vincent and you can stay married and happy. $50,000 for everything to disappear." I came out of my hiding spot at that moment. I couldn't contain myself anymore. I walked into the kitchen and they both froze like they'd seen a ghost. I asked Jessica if she'd just tried to extort me for $50,000, and she started stuttering, saying I'd misunderstood. That it wasn't extortion, but a practical solution. I told her I had recordings of everything, that I knew she'd lied about the accusations, that I had the conversation with her friends where she admitted she'd made it all up. Allison looked at me like I was speaking another language, and Jessica turned pale as paper. Allison asked what I was talking about, and I told her I'd installed recorders in the house weeks ago because I knew something didn't add up, and that I had evidence that Jessica had fabricated everything to manipulate her and get money. Jessica immediately started screaming that I was a psychopath for recording them without permission, that it was invasion of privacy, that she was going to call the police. I told her, "Go ahead, call the police, because I have a lawyer who's waiting for exactly that. And besides, I have evidence of attempted extortion, which is a federal crime." Allison was sitting at the kitchen table with her face in her hands, crying nonstop. I put my phone in front of her and played the recording of Jessica with her friends, then the recording of the conversation from 5 minutes ago. Jessica tried to say the recordings were fake, that I'd edited them, but Allison perfectly recognized her daughter's voice. I asked Allison directly if I really believed I was capable of the things Jessica had said, if in 2 years of relationship I'd given any sign of being that type of person. Allison didn't respond, just kept crying. And I think in that moment she realized she'd allowed her daughter to destroy me without questioning anything, that she'd chosen to believe Jessica's lies without giving me the benefit of the doubt. Jessica started changing tactics, saying she regretted everything, that she was confused, that she had problems and needed help, the typical speech of someone who's just been caught and is trying to minimize the damage. I told her she had exactly 24 hours to pack her things and get out of my house, and that if she didn't do it voluntarily, I was going to start the legal eviction process. Allison said, "Where were they supposed to go?" And I told her that was her problem, not mine, that she'd chosen to believe her manipulative daughter over her husband, and that I no longer wanted anything to do with either of them. That night, Allison tried to talk to me several times, knocking on the master bedroom door where I'd locked myself in, saying we needed to resolve this like adults, that we couldn't throw away 2 years of marriage like that. I told her through the door that there was nothing to resolve, that Jessica had tried to ruin my life with false accusations and extortion, and that she'd been an accomplice by believing her without evidence. I reminded her of all the times she'd justified Jessica's behavior, all the times she'd made me feel like the villain for trying to establish basic boundaries, all the times she'd prioritized her daughter's whims over the stability of our marriage. The next morning, when I came down to the kitchen, Allison was packing things in boxes. She told me they were going to stay with her sister in another state for a while, until they could find their own place. Jessica didn't even come down to say goodbye or apologize, just stayed in her room until it was time to leave. I helped them load the boxes in Allison's car, not because I wanted to be nice, but because I wanted to make sure they actually left. And in a matter of 3 hours, my house was empty again. I hired a locksmith the same day and changed all the locks in the house. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to start the divorce process immediately, and that I wanted to include all the evidence of the false accusations and extortion in the legal documents in case Allison tried to get money from the settlement. My lawyer drafted the papers in 2 days and sent them to Allison. She signed without fighting, I think she knew she had no case, and that she'd ended up as an accomplice to the whole mess Jessica had created. The divorce was finalized in 4 months because there were no shared properties, no children in common, and frankly, neither of them wanted to prolong the process more than necessary. I kept the house, obviously, because it was mine from before the marriage, and Allison kept the car and her personal things, and that was it. But Jessica couldn't just leave things like that. Like 2 weeks after they moved out, she started posting on her social media a completely distorted version of the story. She said she'd been a victim of abuse by her stepfather, that her mother had abandoned her in her most vulnerable moment, that she was struggling alone against trauma, all that shit. She created a GoFundMe, asking for donations for therapy and living expenses, because supposedly she couldn't live with her mother due to the trauma of Allison having chosen her abusive husband over her own daughter. The GoFundMe had photos of her crying and a long dramatic text about her suffering. What Jessica didn't expect was that several of her ex-friends, including the ones who were in that recording where she admitted to lying, got tired of her shit and exposed the truth. One of them posted a detailed response on Instagram, explaining that Jessica had admitted to fabricating the accusations, and others started sharing their own experiences with Jessica's manipulative behavior. The GoFundMe was reported and deleted within 48 hours, and Jessica's reputation on social media basically exploded. The last time I checked her Instagram out of pure curiosity, she'd changed her account to private and had lost like 70% of her followers. About 2 months ago, Laura, my ex-wife, called me to tell me that Allison had contacted her. Apparently, Allison wanted to talk to me, apologize for everything, tell me she'd realized she'd made a huge mistake. Laura asked me if I wanted her to give Allison my new number, and I told her no, that I had nothing to say to her and that anything she needed to communicate to me could be done through my lawyer. I honestly don't feel anything for Allison right now. Not even anger. Just a kind of sad indifference. I feel sorry for her because she's going to have to deal with Jessica for the rest of her life, but that was her choice and she has to live with the consequences. I found out through mutual acquaintances that Jessica is working at a Starbucks and still living with her mother in a small apartment, and that Allison had to get a second job to be able to pay rent because a teacher's salary doesn't cut it. Part of me feels like maybe Jessica will eventually mature and realize the damage she caused, but honestly, I doubt it. People like her rarely take responsibility for their actions. They always find someone else to blame. I moved on with my life the best I could. I took a few weeks off work after the divorce was finalized, like I needed time to process everything and reorganize my life. I repainted the room that had been Jessica's, removed all the ridiculous decorations she'd insisted on putting up, and converted it into an office for myself. I adopted a cat from a shelter, an adult orange cat named Rufus, who'd been there for months because nobody wanted an adult cat, and honestly, he's been better company than my ex-wife and ex-stepdaughter combined. I started going to the gym again, something I'd stopped doing during the marriage because I was always too tired or stressed. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, like going out for beers on Fridays, going to basketball games. Normal things I'd stopped doing because the dynamic in my house was so uncomfortable that I preferred not to invite people over. I also had to distance myself from some volunteer activities I did in community organizations. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew Jessica's accusations. Even though false, I had left a stain on my reputation, and I didn't want my presence to be uncomfortable for anyone or put the organizations at risk. That was maybe the saddest part of all, realizing that even when you prove your innocence, there's always a residue of suspicion. There are always people who think maybe something did happen or that where there's smoke, there's fire. A few weeks ago, I was organizing old papers in my office and found the photos from the wedding with Allison. I looked at them for a moment and tried to remember what I'd felt that day, if there'd been any sign of what was coming, any premonition I'd ignored. But the truth is, that day I really had been happy. I genuinely believed I was starting a new chapter with a good woman and that I could be a positive figure in her daughter's life. How naive I was. How stupid to think that love and good intentions were enough. I threw the photos in the trash without sentimentality. I don't need reminders of that mistake. My lawyer told me I should keep all the evidence and documentation from the case for at least 10 years, in case Jessica tries something in the future, like if she decides to make public accusations again or tries to sue me for something. I have everything stored in a safe in my closet, All the recordings, the text messages, the testimonies, everything. I hope I never have to use it again, but it's there just in case. People ask me if I didn't get married again, if I'd give love another chance, or whatever. And honestly, I don't know. This experience left me super cautious about serious relationships, especially with women who have children. It's not that I have anything against single mothers. Many of them are incredible people doing the best they can in difficult situations. But now I know I'm never going to get seriously involved with someone who has children unless those children are independent adults living on their own, and even then I'm going to be extremely careful. It's not worth the risk of being falsely accused, of having your reputation destroyed, of losing your peace of mind in your own house. And if I ever have doubts about someone again, if my instinct tells me something's wrong, I'm going to listen to it instead of ignoring it, trying to be understanding or giving the benefit of the doubt. That's maybe the hardest lesson I learned from all this. That kindness without limits is an invitation to abuse. And that setting clear boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person with self-respect. Some days I still get angry when I think about everything that happened. Like how Jessica could be so cruel and manipulative. How Allison could believe her without questioning anything. How I was about to lose everything because of the lies of a spoiled brat who wanted money for a ridiculous business. Other days I just feel grateful that everything came to light when it did, before the accusations escalated to something worse, before they involved the police or social services or any other entity that would have made the mess even bigger. And some days, like today, I just feel tired of thinking about it, tired of giving mental energy to people who don't deserve it. Rufus is asleep in my lap as I write this, snoring softly, completely oblivious to all the human drama. And honestly, that's all I need right now. That simplicity, that peace, that absence of manipulation and falsehood. It's enough for now, I guess.